I actually think the opportunity to build or start a Christian school, develop a Christian school, to me is a much more constructive way of fighting the culture war that's not nearly as exhausting.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Narrative. Mike Andrews and Aaron Baer with you to recap another week of news, and it's a bit of blur here.
It's never ending, man.
January's over.
I know.
We're at the end of January already, and it feels like we just got out of the holidays.
Well, and it feels like we just got out of the holidays, but also, a lot of times, inside the narrative stuff, we're getting together and like, oh man, what should we talk about on the news segment today? And it's all coming so fast and furious right now. It's hard to keep up with everything in a great way, in a really good way, which is the other crazy thing is we're not used to things being really good.
Yeah, and it's been 10 days of President Trump in office or so now as we record this. And we do want to talk about all of his executive orders because there's a lot to unpack there. David and I scratched the surface ever so slightly last week, but next week we're going to do just a deep dive. We're going to take a look at some of those executive orders and offer some of our thoughts, just the three of us. It'll mostly be you and David. Nobody cares what I have to say on those.
A little bit.
I can at least be honest at where my place is in the pecking order. But another reason things have been so crazy, you were out of the office all of last week doing some traveling, culminating in going to the March for Life in Washington, D.C. So would love to get some of your first-person thoughts on what that experience was like.
Honestly, not since the passage of the abortion amendment here back in November of 23. On this, and we've tried to be as honest as we can be, or as transparent and real about the state of the pro-life movement since that loss. And the hurt and everything that's gone along with that over the loss of life. But I have not felt more optimistic about the future of the pro-life movement than I did at that March for Life since the overturning of Roe. And I mean, just alone, think about at that March for Life, you had Speaker of the House, Johnson, speak. You had Senate Majority Leader John Thune speak. You had Vice President J.D. Vance give just a bring the house down speech, and I want to come back to that. And then you had President Trump send a video in that was just a stronger speech than he gave when he spoke at the March for Life in his first term. About his commitment to trying to protect the unborn people, unborn children, and all the things we can do there. And it was going into it, everybody was incredibly excited because that morning he had pardoned the 23 pro-lifers that the Biden DOJ had just wrongfully prosecuted, right? And I always joke, I was sad about Biden's or President Trump's DEI ban on because a lot of folks, the Catholic listeners, will be well familiar with EWTN. It's the large Catholic TV station. I'm their DEI evangelical they bring on, and so I'm going to lose my job there now that DEI is banned. I'm just kidding, but. I was actually at EWTN recording some segments with them that morning and I was scrolling through and I saw the videos of the Bevelyn Williams, who's been in prison away from her daughter. Talk about family separation. He was a pro-life protester who was sent to prison for protesting to protect unborn children by the Biden DOJ, and she got pardoned. And seeing her and her husband go and hug her 3-year-old daughter that she hadn't seen in for who knows how long was just powerful. And so you could feel all of that energy there. Governor Ron DeSantis gave one of the most incredible pro-life speeches I've ever heard at the March for Life. That was only trumped by J.D. Vance's speech. And so, yeah, it really was incredible.
I'm wondering, Aaron, what was the mood like? Because we talked when the RNC was going on last summer and life was, we thought, maybe pushed to the fringes of the Republican Party platform. So to see that turnout, you mentioned Speaker Johnson, the Vice President, and President Trump sending a video. How did that land with people and just in terms of I think what we were saying at the time is like, you've got to trust what they're doing here and trying to build a bigger tent. It's not that they're deprioritizing life. And it sounds like they came through in flying colors with that at the march.
Oh, I mean, I think, by all means, I'll just speak for myself. Certainly, I felt really strong, convicted that, hey, they're gonna be pro-life again. That, President Trump is going to come in and bring back. And speaking of his executive orders, he brought back all of the pro-life executive orders from last time. The Mexico City policy to ban federal funding, international funding of abortion. And so all of those things came back, and they're rolling back the Biden administration's pro-abortion policies. Certainly a sigh of relief, like, okay, yes, they delivered on these promises. But even that, that's just one of those things. The Christians that were still, kind of trying to attack President Trump, saying he wasn't pro-life or saying that we shouldn't trust him on the life issue and things like that. It's just, I think a lot of them, the so-called never Trumpers, are being exposed right now because they can't even celebrate. And again, we'll talk about this more next week on the executive order conversation. They can't even celebrate that transgender procedures on kids are banned now because they hate this man so much. And for me, what I kept looking around this summer when people were saying, "Oh, Trump's gone soft on us on the abortion issue, or he's gone left on us," or things like that. It's like, guys, this was the president that appointed the justices that overturned Roe v. Wade. Something we thought, again, we never thought was really going to happen. We just didn't see the path there. And withstood all the attacks over Brett Kavanaugh, right? And again, we've litigated that so many times. Nobody else, do I think, would have withstood what President Trump did with Brett Kavanaugh. And ultimately, what these people were asking us to do is to trust them over trusting the guy that delivered the first time. Mm-hmm. And that just, there's an arrogance there, I gotta say, that is insane to me. Again, that's not to say, I feel even silly having to caveat this way anymore, but this isn't us saying President Trump can do no wrong and he's the end all be all and all that. It is just stepping back. We always talk about results matter. What have you done? And in terms of the agendas we care about, and the issues we care about, nobody has delivered more than, and that should, at a certain point, that needs to start counting more than mean tweets. Right. So, yeah.
Well, and it also, I think, is motivation for us to stay engaged in the process. It's not enough just to vote for a candidate.
Right.
It's enough. You've got to continue to hold them accountable for what they said they're going to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And that, that's for I think a lot of the leaders in the pro-life movement, us staying at the table mattered. Right? Us not going and blowing our lid every time, President Trump or somebody part of the campaign said something that we didn't like, and being a part of those conversations, obviously making it clear we're paying attention, but also saying, hey, we want to stay in this conversation. Honestly, it's a little bit, a part of the whole conversation around RFK right now, taking over at the Health and Human, Robert F. Kennedy taking over at Health and Human Services, being the nominee there. And I think he's going to get confirmed. We'll see what all happens here. But again, RFK is not pro-life, right? He would say that. He would say he's pro-choice, right? But he would also say he works for the president. And he has said in these confirmation hearings, he is going to implement the president's policies on abortion. And so again, the question is, who are we giving the benefit of the doubt to? Are we giving the benefit of the doubt to the guy who appointed the justices that overturned Roe, that has delivered more than any other president on this issue for us? Or are we giving the benefit of the doubt to the talking heads? And I think it's silly to say otherwise. And which, by the way, too, I think what RFK is going to do in HHS on the MAHA front, the Make America Healthy Again front, is one of the most important things that could happen in this administration. When you think about all that's going on with the pharmaceutical companies and our food and things like that, it's incredible. And he is saying he's going to take his lead from the president on this issue. And so it really is very encouraging. I do just want to say one last thing on the March for Life. If you haven't watched J.D. Vance's speech yet, you need to go watch it. Because J.D. Vice President Vance is is using the language that we're using right now of saying the future of the pro-life movement is through marriage and the family. Is that if we want to end abortion, we need to get people married, and we need to make babies as seen as a blessing, not as a curse. So when he gets up there and says, make more babies, the idea there is that to see children as the gift of God that they are, instead of something that can be holding us back from self-actualization. And there's so much more that goes into that, but he gets it. I can't begin to tell you how unbelievably refreshing it is to see somebody in his position truly understand what's happening in our country and our culture so much, and it is a real gift to have him there.
And he has a way of articulating subjects that just land differently, and that I think that's been one of his biggest strengths on display throughout the campaign and throughout his early days in office. So big credit to JD for the way that he came through in that speech.
And showed Ohio well.
That's right. It's not only in Washington that things are moving across the street at the State House. We've got some stuff cooking now, too. And Senate Bill 1 was something that really is coming back from the last GA, this DEI bill at universities, colleges and universities in the state of Ohio. And Senator Serino is sponsoring it. So take us through some of the nuts and bolts behind that and why it's necessary.
Yeah, I mean, this is just an incredible piece of legislation. And the fact that it's Senate Bill 1, last year it was Senate Bill 83. And not all the times can you read into, most of the time the bill number is irrelevant. When something is typically a single digit bill, Senate Bill 1, 2, 3, 5, it's a sign that it's a priority for leadership. So the fact that Senate Bill, that the ban on DEI at Ohio's institutions of higher education is Senate Bill 1 sends a really strong message about the priority of it. And Senator Serino is a phenomenal guy to be carrying this thing. So the first thing here is that, for those of you who've been around CCB for a while, the Christian Business Partnership has been growing, and we just hired Monty Lobb as the executive director, and this was his first time testifying. We kind of threw him to the wolves on this really controversial bill. He did a phenomenal job, especially in a room full of college students with tape over their mouths, which I was actually kind of happy about. It kind of kept them quiet in there.
They're finally learning.
Exactly, right? To oppose it. But it was a phenomenal hearing that way, and hopefully we'll get more hearings here soon. But the other thing about this, and I can't remember, I think it was Professor Richard Vedder from Ohio University who said this that I thought was such a great comment. Or no, it was Senator Serino that said this in questioning, where they, the Democrats on the committee tried to say that this was an unfunded mandate, right? To cut these programs was an unfunded mandate. It didn't make any sense. But Senator Serino made a really good point, and this is one of these things that we have to recognize. They implemented all of this DEI policy without ever getting an order or an allocation from the General Assembly to do this, right? We're going to talk here in an upcoming episode with Rachel O'Brien from Open the Books, and they found that $13.3 million at Ohio State alone was spent last year on DEI. That was never allocated from the General Assembly. They just took money that the General Assembly had sent them for their general work and hired all of these positions. They made that mandate on themselves. And this has just been happening at our colleges and universities for decades, right? This didn't happen overnight. And now you actually see university or the state leaders actually awakening to what's going on in these places. And I think one of the most fundamental principles here at play is that we have allowed the left and the media to take the idea of academic freedom, which is an important idea, that you allow folks to have sort of free speech and have a broad debate of ideas on your college campuses. They've used that to bully lawmakers into saying, and the appropriators, right? They're the constitutionally defined appropriators of taxpayer dollars. They've bullied appropriators, i.e. your state representatives and governor, to close their eyes and just send billions of dollars every year to the university systems and have no say in how it's spent, right? Because of academic freedom. That's meaningless. These are state institutions, right? This is taxpayer dollars that those lawmakers are accountable for how it's being spent. And for too long, we've allowed them to pass the buck down to these bureaucrats who have political agendas and run amok with these things. Well, Senate Bill 1 is the beginning of the end of that. And hopefully there's going to be more of this to come. Because when you really start asking the question, what's the purpose of higher education in a state? Why do we invest so much in so many of these universities? It makes you question a lot of the spending we see happening there. That's the question they don't want you asking, because it's really gonna cause you to see, hey, we've got some misguided priorities here that are wasting a ton of dollars and not fulfilling their core needs.
Well, and I think there was a report this past week too that even in the face of these DEI cutbacks, some universities are choosing to cut academics instead of their DEI program, which kind of gives away the goat.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Scott Yenner wrote that from the Claremont Institute about how, Toledo, Miami, and Kent State all are losing students like significantly, right? This is part of the baby bust, that kind of stuff. So they're, instead of rolling back their DEI programs, they're cutting back academics, but they're keeping these robust DEI expenditures and these really expensive DEI officers.
Which is exactly what you go to college for, is to participate in a school that has a robust DEI program.
Right.
Well, one last thing we want to hit on real quick. It is School Choice Week here, and we've been doing some various celebrations with our OSIN team, and we're actually going to talk with Jimmy Scroggins, who's a Florida pastor who wrote a book about the need for churches to plant schools. So Troy McIntosh of OSIN and Chris Lightfoot from the Church Ambassador Network are going to jump in for that interview. But you had a response to a hit piece that the New Yorker put out a couple weeks ago. I think we talked about it on the podcast, but got an opportunity to respond in full in the National Review. We had Blues Brothers quotes and some Outkast was in there too. I think
it was a great, like a dream come true. Blues Brothers is one of my all-time favorite movies, and actually Blues Brothers 2000 holds up. So if you haven't seen that one yet, that's actually a really good one too. Don't.
The saxophone player from the Blues Brothers went to my high school. That's my claim to fame of Fairless High School.
He was the cook in the kitchen where you ordered the dry toasted 4-hole fried chickens. So one, thanks to the National Review for allowing us to run that response. And again, I think the piece speaks for itself. I know we've posted all over the place, and we might be doing a little bit more with it. But the bottom line on it is, the media continues to be more obsessed with attacking groups like us than looking at the real devastation. The National Association of Education Progress, the NAEP scores just came out again, and we're actually moving backwards in literacy in America, right? I mean, it is such a black hole, and we're spending more than ever. Taxpayers spend 3 times as much in these public schools as we spend at on the voucher. I love what Aaron Churchill from the Fordham Institute talks about, how we spend $30 billion on public education, $1 billion on the voucher program, but we don't have 10 times as many kids in the public schools. It's more like 6. It's crazy. It's not even like 6. It's even less than that. But the reality is, that's the real scandal, and that's what they're not looking at. And I appreciate NRO for letting us tell that story.
Yeah, definitely go read Aaron's op-ed if you haven't already. You'll see the need for an education reformation, which is what we're talking to Jimmy Scroggins about coming up next on The Narrative. Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian Chamber of Commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. And we're back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews, joined now by the Executive Director of our Church Ambassador Network, Chris Lightfoot, and the Executive Director of the Ohio Christian Education Network, Troy McIntosh. And we're going to have a conversation now with Pastor Jimmy Scroggins, who is a professor of Christian ministry at Southern Seminary and has served as lead pastor of Family Church in South Florida since July of 2009.
He's also a member of the Board of Trustees at Palm Beach Atlantic University, and before joining the staff at Family Church, Dr. Scroggins served as the teaching pastor at Highview Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky, and the Dean of Boyce College. He's married to Kristin. They have 8 children and 2 grandchildren, and it is great to have you on The Narrative today, Jimmy. Thanks so much for joining us.
You bet, Mike. I'm glad to be on with you guys, and glad to connect with guys with whom we have common cause, and I think we definitely do.
Yeah, and we want to talk to you about your book, The Education Reformation, that came out in 2024. It aligns pretty well with the work of who are sitting next to me, Chris and Troy, as we seek to mobilize the church to really change the way that children are being educated throughout the country. And let me just ask you the question. This is a broad question, but why did you feel the need to write this book?
Well, as a pastor and as a father and as a grandfather, I just look around the world. We are definitely living in a negative world. I think that's a very helpful term, a very helpful frame, and it's experientially true. Even though it may feel to some as if the political or cultural pendulum is swinging a little bit to the right lately, I still think even a move with what is primarily a soulless conservatism is not the same thing as biblical Christianity, and I don't think it changes the parameters of the negative world that we're facing now and we're going to be facing increasingly in the future. So I think one of the responsibilities of churches and pastors is we have to raise up husbands and fathers who have the tools and the desire and the understanding that we're in a fight, and we've got to fight hard for our families, for our marriages, for our children, for our grandchildren, and we want to create the best opportunities we can for our kids to know Jesus, to love Jesus, to live out the ideals and the teachings of Jesus, but also to be successful citizens in this country and in this world. And I think a partnership between a church and a Christian family and a Christian school is the ideal environment, and perhaps the only environment that gives us a fighting chance.
What was your first step as you considered this and thought about that partnership with schools? As a pastor, father, grandfather, what did you see as the first step to take in that journey toward a possible reformation?
Well, we've homeschooled our kids all the way up. And along the way, we've had some stints where we also interacted with public schools and private Christian schools, and we're thankful for all of those opportunities. But I think the first thing we did is begin to articulate this idea of this dynamic partnership between the Christian family, the Christian church, and the Christian school. And we already had a small Christian school, a preschool, with and we began to add elementary grades to it. And then we just got this idea. Our church owns a lot of property in various places around South Florida. And we said, hey, what if we just try to put some form of a Christian school everywhere that we own a building? And so we begun to do that. And then I began to look around at the national landscape and do a little bit of research. And I see that I think especially since COVID, dads have really woken up. Even dads who aren't explicitly religious or Christians, normies, some people call them. These are just basic red-blooded American people that like want good things for their families and want to be patriotic and want to basically care about the right things, even if they're not explicitly Christian or religious. They're looking around and they're freaking out because of all the chaos. They look around and they see the furries at the ballpark, and they see the drag queen in the library, and they see the Boy Scouts with girls in it, and they just kind of look around and go, what in the heck is going on? And how are we going to raise our kids? So we began to try to connect with these dads through our church, through different ministries that we have, but we found the best way to do it is to give those dads a place to put their kids in school. And through that, we've connected with all these dads and begin to win a bunch of dads to Christ. They begin to see that the yearning that they have, good things for their kids, virtues, character, excellence, those kinds of things are actually biblical values. And through that, they begin to see the gospel of Jesus. And we've been able to lead a bunch of them to Christ doing it this way. So we started seeing it. We started talking about it, started articulating it. Started creating these opportunities through our Christian school, and we've seen a lot of great fruit from it.
And what's the response been like as you've set out to begin this process? Was it a lot of that natural buy-in, or on the church side, did you sense some hesitancy, like this is too big of a challenge for us, or just the rollout phase as you attempted to magnify what you were doing? What was that like?
Mike, I've been astounded. So this really surprised me. So when I first threw it out there, we're at this vision meeting and had all these leaders in the room, like a couple thousand people are in there. I go, I'll tell you right now, what we're going to do, we're going to put everywhere we have a building, we're going to put a Christian school. So every Christian family in this church, regardless of their income level, regardless of the kind of learner they're having, we're going to do everything we can to give them a Christian school that they can afford, that's going to be excellent, that's going to help moms and dads pass our Christian values on to the next generation. I say all kinds of stuff passionately, but when I said that, it was like, they started going crazy. They're clapping, they're cheering, and I was like, man, I did not expect. And from then on, every time I bring up the need for Christian school, our congregations at Family Church, they clap, they cheer spontaneously, because it's like there's this pent-up desire to do something. And so, kind of like one of the reasons that I think Donald Trump is so effective politically right now is there's a bunch of people who just kind of want to shake their fist at all the cultural winds that are blowing the wrong direction. Mm-hmm. But the problem is, it's not enough just to tear down what other people are doing, what other people believe. What I think is great about a Christian school is it gives you a chance to build something. Mm. Like, instead of just crying and moaning and trying to tear up things that other people are doing, what if we just build something better and stronger and more powerful based on the gospel of Jesus and coming from the Bible? So I just think we've had I don't know if it's that way everywhere, but our response here has been, in fact, our response is more enthusiastic than we can actually produce. So people are like, let's go faster. Let's hire more. Let's raise more money. Let's do more. And I'm like, whoa. We're, got to do this in a way that's sustainable. I find the appetite for the people to move forward aggressively is actually greater than our organizational capacity to successfully do it.
Troy, you've been on the ground floor of the Ohio Christian Education Network, head of school at Worthington Christian for a number of years. As you've helped roll this model out in Ohio, what kind of response have you gotten in our first two school plants? Just give us a quick overview of how they're doing.
Sure. So in our work, one of our major priorities is to help churches start Christian schools in their facilities, and we really leverage existing facilities that they have that largely sit empty during the week to help keep the cost down of starting the school, so they don't have to have large capital expenses at the beginning of the project. We have so far launched 2 new schools right here in Columbus, and we anticipate somewhere between 8 to 10 opening next school year, and we have about 44 total schools in the pipeline looking out over the next 2 to 3 years. Just to give you an example, the first school that we opened was Westside Christian School in a neighborhood in Columbus called the Hilltop. It's one of the highest crime, highest poverty rate, highest rates of single parenthood in the city. It's just a tough area. That school started out with 30 students in kindergarten, first and second grade in a church that had been in the Hilltop for a long time, but it's not a large church. It was a church of about 200 that just said, we're willing to host this school and make it part of what we do. And the results that the church experienced was unbelievable. Again, this was an older church. Church had been in the Hilltop for decades, going back into the 50s. But largely, the people who were attending the church were coming from the suburbs. They were no longer Hilltop residents. And they'd always longed to have a better outreach to the neighborhood. Well, within 6 months of them opening a Christian school, drawing kids from the neighborhood to attend school, their youth department more than doubled. Their Awana program more than doubled. It went from about 25 kids to over 60 kids. Same thing with their Sunday morning program. They began to be bursting at the seams, not even having room anymore for their kids' program. So it just had this tremendous effect because parents were sending their kids to Westside Christian, and they began to see that for the first time their kids were having a good experience at school. They weren't dreading going to school. They didn't feel, insecure going to school, unsafe. Their teachers loved them. They were hearing about Jesus. They were understanding the gospel. And it was such a good experience. The parents said, I want to know more about that too, and started coming to church and participating in the activities there.
Yeah, that's amazing. What Pastor Scroggins, do you think is the best first step that a church could take if this is something that's on their heart, or maybe they're hearing about for the first time? If this even sparks an interest, what would you recommend that they do to begin investigating this journey?
Well, I think they can do some research, and of course, the great thing about the internet is you can find anything really fast. And so there are organizations like ACSI, Association of Christian Schools International. They have a whole section on their website about how to start a Christian school. They got a lot of resources and research that can help you do that. There's another group called the Herzog Foundation. They also are focusing heavily on helping churches, particularly start Christian schools. They have a whole ton of material out there and resources available to help you do it. But the main thing that I would do if I was a pastor and I had an interest, is I would just start talking about it to people. I think pastors will find if they start talking about the need for a Christian school, I think they'll find more support than they think.
Chris, you interact with a lot of pastors and denominational leaders here in Ohio. As you talk about school planting and connecting them with Troy and the work that OSIN's doing, what are you sensing from them as they maybe step out in faith on something as big as starting a school?
Yeah, well, and similar to Dr. Scroggins, and we can cut this from the podcast if you need to. I got a personal question for you, Dr. Scroggins, because I struggle with this all the time in our network. Do you prefer doctor or pastor?
It doesn't really matter. Usually I just go by my first name, Jimmy. So that's fine too.
All right.
Whatever you guys like.
Pastor Dr. Jimmy.
Pastor Dr. Jimmy.
No, I don't ever go by Dr. Jimmy. Dr. Scroggins, Pastor Jimmy, or Jimmy is all.
Got it. Good. All right. Well, we'll use those interchangeably from here on out through the rest of the podcast. Similar to your experience, I think we find culturally and within the congregations a lot of excitement because this is something tangible that they can do that impacts the next generation. I think, and maybe Troy, this will even lead to another question for you. One of the things that we typically also find is that pastors will have their passion projects and they typically only have capacity for 2 or 3. And so finding a way to make planting a Christian school one of their passion projects, and how do you communicate that to a pastor who maybe hasn't had this on their radar? They see the need for it, they understand that, but my church, why my church? Right? I've got other things I'm working on. I don't know if in the conversations, Troy, you've got a full pipeline now, which is really exciting. Pastor Scroggins, you've had a lot of conversations within your circles there in Florida, but also broadly across the nation. What are a couple things that you guys, for a pastor who might be hearing this and say, yeah, I get it, I see the need, but why my building? What are a couple things that you guys might throw out and say, make this one of your passion projects, and here's why you need to?
I'd like to hear from Troy. Troy, I'm so excited about the idea you have 10 more opening next year and 40 over the next year. That's incredible.
Yeah. Well, I'll refer to something that Jimmy and Trevin, a point that they make in their book, and that is that education really is a vital part of a child's discipleship, any person's discipleship, not just a child. It's easy for Christians to kind of bifurcate spiritual and secular, church life and school life. And that is a terrible epistemology for a Christian to hold. And so one of the things that we've been praying for is that pastors and church leaders would begin to see that education cannot be separated from a child's discipleship. So when Paul writes in Colossians 3 that we are his body, the fullness of him who fills everything in every way, that's a description of the reality that God inhabits every aspect of the universe, and that's why we study it. That's why there's value in it. It opens up every field of study to the Christian, and why that's part of taking dominion, right? Is gaining an understanding of the universe so that we can see God's actions and work in it. And there's no better way of doing that, I think, than a Christian school, because as great of a church's youth program can be, they're not going to have an art history class on Sunday mornings. They're not going to have a chemistry class. They're not going to have a pre-calculus class. And yet all of these things and so many others are part of the world that God inhabits with his presence. And so those are part of a student's discipleship. And to try to rip apart any transcendent understanding from those subject areas leaves a shell of an education, and really a shell of a worldview for the student who's trying to understand what the world means and how God interacts with it.
I don't know if you had anything to add to that. Going back to your book, in your first chapter that you and Trevin wrote together, and I think chapter 1 was specifically yours, there was one section where it said, and this is kind of in that hostile environment section that we're talking through, it said, as a moral minority, our position as a moral minority is likely to persist for the foreseeable future. Promise I can read. This means that we ought to recognize the need and call for culture building in a world of culture warring. We believe that a new commitment to a partnership between home, church, and school represents a better way forward in a hostile world. And that's kind of, Troy, what you were just talking about. We got to bring these pieces together. And I can't remember, this might have even been Trevin that I'm stealing this from, but somebody recently I heard say, and I think this is some of the hang up or hesitation that I sometimes hear from pastors is they're exhausted by the culture war. They're exhausted by the political war, and jumping into this feels like another piece of that. And I've taken to saying, you know what, those are just proxy wars for a much deeper spiritual war. And what we're talking about when we're talking about starting a Christian school is getting at the heart of the spiritual war that's going on for the next generation. And for whatever reason, that starts to lower the defenses, or it makes it a little bit more, okay, yeah, that is in my lane. That's something that I do care about that. So that was not nearly as eloquent or in-depth as Troy's response. And I think all of those components are much more better fleshed out and what the pastors need to understand. But that getting to that heart of that spiritual war component is something that I've tried to tap on to get them away from the exhaustion or the hesitation of jumping into what they perceive as another cultural war issue.
Yeah, it's funny because I actually think the opportunity to build or start a Christian school, develop a Christian school, to me is a much more constructive way of fighting the culture war that's not nearly as exhausting.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually building something that can matter.
Yeah.
So if we can start a school and resource it and create the right kind of experience for kids and for their families, I mean, we could start a school in 2025 that could still be here in 2125. Mm-hmm. Like, why not? The city's still going to be here in 2125. Why this church will probably be here in 2125. This church is 125 years old. Mm-hmm. It'll probably be here another 100 years. So why can't we do something now that's going to impact the kids in this area in the immediate, but well beyond any of, the great grandchildren of the kids that are in school right now could be in school here or could send their kids to school here. So I just think the opportunity to build something is a much more, to me, much more invigorating way to fight the culture war than getting on Twitter and trying to, put, Senator whoever on blast.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And to Troy's point, the evangelism and discipleship opportunities that we've seen come out of Westside and that we expect to see come out of all these other schools that are in the pipeline, I mean, that's right in line with the heart of the pastor.
Yeah. One of the things that you point out in the book, Jimmy, is that you can start schools of various types, right? You can start the really large Christian school that's well-resourced with a 100,000 square foot building, but you can also start small at a micro school. And that's really what we did and are doing here in Ohio. The two schools we started both started with under 30, 35 kids in 4 or 5 classrooms that the church already had. And we're really... Westside Christian and Crown Prep on the East Side are making generational differences in their community. Mm-hmm. The neighborhood where Westside Christian resides has 3 neighborhood public schools. In 2022, none of those 3 neighborhood public schools had a 3rd grade reading passage rate higher than 5%. It was an entire generation of kids in a neighborhood growing up that were functionally illiterate. In 1 year, in the first year of Westside Christian, that we raised that to 75% for the kids who attended. And so for the first time, really the genesis of the program, the genesis of the school was a pastor who had kids in his youth group, middle school youth group, who couldn't read the Bible. They couldn't read, period. And he realized, how am I supposed to disciple a kid who can't read Scripture? And so this is such an important call for the church, and one that we can't ignore. We're in a crisis situation. And what greater investment can a church make in its youth than saying, we're willing to commit the resources to do this so that we can influence these kids 30 to 35 hours per week? What other opportunity exists like that for churches?
Yeah, and maybe on the other side of that, Troy, as you're talking about an inner city school, I know I'm relatively rural in where I live, and one piece of that first chapter that you wrote, Jimmy, that I really appreciated, and you brought in Tolkien and Lord of the Rings to illustrate this, is the people in a community like mine that are, deeply entrenched in that school pride, and that kind of those cultural topics are being talked about in inner city schools, but not my school. So if you could just give us the counter that you used using the Shire as an illustration, if you don't mind.
Christian schools.
Well, I was just saying that there are people who live in the Shire. So I've always grown up in the Bible Belt. I know what that feels like. I actually really like it. But when you live in the Shire, it's easy to convince yourself that the forces of Mordor are not advancing. It's easy to convince yourself that you live in some pocket of the world that's never going to be touched by the evils that other people, other places are having to grapple with. And the problem is that it's just not true. And so I don't know if you guys remember the Lord of the Rings, but in the way the movie told it, there was I can't remember which one of those guys, the hobbits had a dream, and they dreamed of the Shire just being burned to the ground. And that's what we have to remember, is that the forces of Mordor never stop. And you have to remember that you've got to fight. And the thing of it is, even if you live in the Shire, I believe the day is coming when what happens in your public schools will become so different from what Christian parents want their kids exposed to, that Christian churches will be almost duty bound to start schools. I would rather start some form of a school before you have to. Mm-hmm. And you can go ahead and start now and be ready when the time, because I think it may be 5 years, maybe 10 years, it may be 20 years, but at some point, everybody's going to need one.
And I would add to that even if a parent doesn't believe that their public school has these nefarious influences in their school, I would probably dispute that they are there, whether they think that they're not. But even if they think there aren't, I grew up in a Christian family 3 times a week in church. And so, my family, I was committed to that when church went to public school. And I don't, this was 35, 40 years ago, back when you didn't see a lot of the things outwardly that we see today. But still, the impact that it had was, in the very least, it gave me the subtle impression that my faith had nothing to do with my education. And they were 2 totally different tracks that didn't merge. And it wasn't until I was in college that I began to have professors and colleagues begin to show me how those things are integrated together. And when that happened, my whole world changed. I finally had a Christian worldview rather than just a faith that was disconnected from the rest of the universe. It completely changed everything. Everything became more meaningful. Everything had purpose at that point. That's what Christian education does. And it's completely different. There's no such thing as a neutral education. We just need to get rid of that idea now. Every education has a worldview and moral foundation to it. And so it's incumbent on us to provide our kids with an education that has a Christian worldview, Christian foundation to it, so that their discipleship is built on that.
Yeah, that's good. Well, the book is Education Reformation. Jimmy, if if anybody listening today wants to get a hold of this book or wants to give it to their pastor to start the conversation at their church about starting a school, how can they get a hold of this? And again, just some practical first steps for our listeners today.
Yeah, you can definitely get it on Amazon, but you can also go to the North American Mission Board's website, NAMB.net. They have it available as a free ebook download if you like. And so the whole point of the book, no authors are getting royalties for it or anything. We literally wrote the book and published it because we believe in the movement. And so that's why it's available for free. It's very inexpensive if you want to order hard copies. And I'd encourage anybody who wants to encourage people in your church or encourage your pastor, encouraging people in your community, consider it and check it out. And as is noted, one of the things that I think is the best thing about the book is it doesn't champion one specific model. We think there are a lot of different ways that churches could be involved in Christian schooling. And I think every church ought to be either hosting a Christian school, starting a Christian school, or partnering with someone else to start a Christian school.
And I would just add that if you're in Ohio, we would love for you to contact the OSIN team at CCV, and we provide our consulting services at no cost to churches who want to start these schools, and we'd be happy to join in and partner with you in getting that launched for you.
And if you're a pastor and you want to talk to another pastor who has started a Christian school and get their experience on that, we can get you connected to those pastors so you can get a kind of a firsthand account of how that's impacted their ministry. That'd be great.
Well, Chris, Troy, thanks so much for joining me today. And Jimmy, thanks for writing the book. And we'll be praying that it brings a fruitful harvest of Christian schools throughout the nation.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.